evening. My name's Julie Willis. I'm a Professor of Architecture and Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. Before we commence tonight's proceedings, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. They are the first archivists, the makers of records, the keepers of records over thousands of generations. Welcome to you all on behalf of the University. Thank you for being here in the Kathleen Fitzpatrick Theatre, a perfect venue for International Women's Day. This theatre honours the outstanding work of one woman. Kathleen Fitzpatrick obtained her BA at Melbourne in the 1920s and then progressed to a second BA from Oxford in 1928, completing the 3-year degree in 2. The first time she applied for an academic post at Melbourne was in 1935, but the Appointments Board knocked her back, saying women were only wanted as secretaries. In 1937, she applied again and was awarded a lectureship in history here, doubling the number of women in the program from 1, Jessie Webb, to 2. The only other member of staff at that time was Professor Max Crawford, and perhaps it's the only moment in the history of history at Melbourne where women academics outnumbered men. In 1956, Fitzpatrick was the only woman on the Foundation Australian Humanities Research Council. That same year, an 18-year-old Germaine Greer enrolled in an arts degree at Melbourne. And here are their student cards. 2 scholarly pioneers, a generation apart. These cards are 2 of the millions of records in the custody of the University of Melbourne Archives Repository in Brunswick. The Greer Archive is also housed there. The earliest records in the Greer Archive document Germaine's time as a student here in the university between 1956 and 59, including her lecture notes on Greek tragedy, Elizabethan tragedy, Jacobean tragedy, Kant and Aristotle, all the male greats of a classical humanities education. As you will hear tonight, one of Germaine's sometimes overlooked contributions to feminism is her determination to insert women into the canon of literature and art. The Greer Archive is a vast collection that documents 60 years of her work as a student, a scholar, a feminist, an environmentalist, a journalist, a star of reality TV and talk shows, an author and a correspondent. It is a major acquisition, and in the past 16 months, the University has put in unprecedented resources to cataloguing and processing it. Tonight, Dr. Rachel Buchanan, Curator of the Greer Archive, and 4 of the archivists who have catalogued the collection are going to introduce a Germaine Greer you do not know, the archivist. Professor Greer will respond with a discussion of why she created the archive and what her ambitions are for it. So without further ado, I will pass over to Dr. Buchanan to coordinate the rest of the program. Thank you.
In 2014, Germaine Greer met University archivist Dr. Katrina Dean. Here they are in the sunshine, enjoying Greer's beautiful garden at her home in Essex. Germaine talking, Katrina listening, taking notes with an archivist tool of choice, a 2B lead grey pencil. Katrina went to England to appraise and pack up Greer's archive. This was a really massive task. The archive is vast and it was stored in more than 100 filing cabinet drawers in 2 locations, an office and an outhouse, an outbuilding. Sorry, Germaine, an outbuilding. After 3 weeks, the job was done. The records were packed up, shipped to Melbourne, and then put into the University of Melbourne repository in Brunswick. Here it is. The building used to be a whiskey store. It's very hush-hush out there. Shelves of paper doing time in a paper penitentiary. Secure, climate-controlled, quiet. Archivists are quiet too. They like to let the records do the talking. This is the Greer Archive. Greer Town, as I like to call it, occupies 82 metres of shelf space, which is about 3 times the space of a near neighbour, Geoffrey Blaney. Talk about man-spreading. Since October 2015, I've been working with this wall of paper. My title is curator, but perhaps boxer would be a better one. Sometimes I even wear gloves. There are days when I look at this wall of boxes and it feels like a tsunami, a king tide of second wave emotion, a great swell of greasy faxes and rusty staples and furry brown folders that I need to exchange for acid-free ones. I look at this wall and I see a mausoleum or a morgue, a jail, shelves of human remains, everything locked up, locked down, secure, sanitised. But if I tilt my head sideways, I see something else. I see a skyscraper, and every box is a window into another room, and each room is bursting with life. Open one of the windows. Here's Unit 10 in the Early Years series. This is my mediocre handwriting on the acid-free folders. In here, you can find an invitation to a party at a hunting lodge, a copy of Oz magazine with Germaine on the front, mischievously unzipping Vivian Stanshall's fly, and a 1968 appointment diary that documents a marriage, a graduation, and the end of a marriage, all in the space of 3 weeks. Listen, it's noisy in here. Next to the diary, there's the only piece of vinyl in the archive, a bootleg of MC5's Kick Out the Jams, soundtrack to a revolution. I like to imagine Germaine blasting this out as she typed the first sentences of the book that would become The Female Eunuch, grabbing a blue biro to rescue a tedious sentence and turn it into something immediate. In the next 20 minutes, 4 archivists who have worked on this archive will open windows into some of the rooms they have explored. We have met many versions of Germaine Greer, and now Germaine Greer will meet us. Thank you.
Meet Christopher Greer. Germaine Greer has written, "I've once too often been photographed with a cat on my shoulder or in my arms. It makes as much sense to say I love cats as that a heroin addict loves heroin. Cats have been a bad habit of mine. But this is a favourite photograph with her most anthropomorphic puss." Germaine Greer and Christopher have gazed down on me from our office notice board for the months I've spent with the archives of Professor Greer's major works, the archival series concerned with her published works. This series of over 600 files primarily gives us access to Greer as researcher and writer. It provides the history of how her books have come to be. It also clearly shows that the major works are but one part of her prodigious output as scholar, writer, academic, commentator. Is there ever a downtime? And the series also reveals the interweaving of Germaine Greer's work and her life, constantly working, but with the energy and aesthetic to create environments of beauty and practicality in houses in London, rural England, Italy, even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and returning at last to save a Queensland rainforest at Cave Creek. Articles on Greer have featured her homes and haunts, one of the Library of Congress subject headings we've added to direct researches. They describe her kitchen design, her lush textiles, her menageries of animals, her gardens. She's been pictured in her Missoni dresses, tanned in sundress in Tuscany, and of course looking fabulous, farming and gardening at Stump Cross, Essex, in overalls with pearls. As I've busily uncreased, refolded, listed and boxed, I've found myself picturing Germaine Greer's life, imagining her beavering away on the Female Eunuch in the Pheasantry, an icon of 60s bohemian London, the celebrity at New York's Chelsea Hotel, venturing into dark churches in Italy to seek out forgotten paintings by female artists and to record them in one of her many notebooks of diligent research. Here we have a sketch depicting typically unglamorous inhabitant of gorgeous vestments with the essential small dog. I've also thought of her chronically unsuccessful attempts to create a garden at her house in Westbourne Terrace, described in her hilarious private eye column, The Revolting Garden by Rose Blight. Or beginning The Whole Woman, the sequel to The Female Eunuch she said she would never write, in a white-hot heat at the mills, her fervour possibly tempered by a comforting cat on the lap. These photographs of Greer at work seem to show the pleasure of an amiable cat, Christopher again, and I think Shanghai Jim, one of a long line of tabby cats. Most of all, I would have loved to have been a visitor, or better, a fly on the wall, at the old stone house in Tuscany, Pianelli, which Greer purchased in 1973. This photo showing some early visitors enjoying their first summer there. Here are some pages from The Unaccompanied Guest at Pianelli, a guide by Greer for her guests, having made the generous offer of loan of her Italian house to Newnham colleagues in 1990, I'm sure taken up with alacrity. We're now so used to online guides in the era of Airbnb, but this is a carefully produced booklet containing alphabetically arranged advice on everything the visitor could possibly need, from ambulance, advising with a degree of Italian pragmatism to not wait for an ambulance, but just load the sufferer into the car and have someone hold a white pillowcase and drive to the hospital sounding the horn continuously, to wine, noting there is plenty of wine to be had for remarkably little money, most of it not very good. Mention is also made of Greer's makeshift still. This Heath Robinson-like contraption was used to distill essential oils from Pianelli plants. A 1983 letter to Camille Nash describes being distracted from her writing one day as she prepares a master tincture of myrtle of minced leaves, drowned in a litre of ethanol and distilled water, in secret proportions known only to very senior homeopaths and unscrupulous individuals like me. In a lively exchange with her publisher on a copy editing matter for The Change, English language usage is another of the Library of Congress subject headings we've added, Greer writes, "What you are buggering about with is my life, not my job, my life." As archivists, we keep records as evidence of activities and catalogue to make the records usable for researchers. We favour a light touch with description which preserves the context in which the records were created and the arrangement of their creator, and guides the researcher to make their own heuristic discoveries. While it's not traditional for archivists to insert themselves, the exceptional richness of this archive and its at times excoriating honesty has meant I have sometimes felt immersed in Germaine Greer's life, I hope providing some solid stepping stones for future researchers and not buggering about too much with it.
In April 1972, Germaine Greer was approached by Playboy assistant managing editor Nat Lehrman to write an article on rape. This piece was billed by Playboy as a plea for an honest contemporary sexual ethic and argued for a definition of rape that encompasses the various forms of emotional and psychological coercion, which were then, and are often still, considered just a normal part of courtship. The story from commission, research, drafting, publication and reader response can be traced through the records of the correspondence series in the Germaine Greer archive. So, how does the High Priestess of Women's Liberation, as she was called, end up writing for Playboy? In the Playboy interview in 1971, from which this image is taken, she stated, "My role is simply to preach to the unconverted. I'm the one who talks to Playboy." Greer had expressed in The Female Eunuch that she considered both men and women were victims of patriarchy, and little could be achieved without involving men in the discourse. In a letter from the period, she states, "At the moment I'm preparing an article on rape for Playboy, that is to say, for the rapists." In the same letter, she says of sexual violence, it is obviously connected with distorted feelings of some kind. One does attack the weaker, children, old ladies, because one feels weak and impotent oneself. So, is there any point talking to misogynists and rapists? A document from the correspondence series gives us an indication of the effect the article had on Playboy readers. This editorial mail memorandum tells us Playboy received 67 total responses, 28 positive, 25 negative, 12 forwarded to Germaine, and 2 requesting reprints. Seduction is a 4-letter word made me realise that I was a two-faced, conniving prick, with absolutely no regard for the feelings of those girls who believed in my phony sincerity. As my penance, I have made Germaine's essay required reading for my teenage sons, as well as a topic of family discussion. Another reader shared the shocking revelation that women speak differently to each other as opposed to when speaking to men. I think the first real awakening came when I heard some women talking alone. They were in the root cellar sorting jars, and I was reading, and I guess they forgot I was there. I heard them talking and listened, and it suddenly hit me that they were talking differently. So I went over and said something, and they talked knowing I was there. Shit. So, from this, can we say that Germaine and Playboy shared the same aims? Freelance journalist Craig Carpel asked her in 1973 to contribute to a spread in which 10 noted personalities tell what prominent individual they think the world would be best off without and why. Her selection was Hugh Hefner. The phenomenal presentation skills developed by the Hefner cartel can persuade people who should know the terror and beauty of love that sex is wholesome and sensible, a necessary supplement to the low-fat and expensive liquor diet in building the world's ruling class. So when Playboy telegrammed to advise that she had won an award for Best Article of the Year, she declined to attend the presentation. Can't go to New York City as Hefner's creature, can't accept prize if don't go, damned if I'll let them keep the money, and donated the $1,000 prize money to the National Organisation for Women's Legal Defence Fund. Now, as an archivist working on the Germaine Greer archive, I've read somewhere in the vicinity of 40,000 letters. Many of these are fairly routine, things like printed emails with requests for comment, requests for autographs, offers to be a talking head on BBC documentaries. But interspersed are some remarkable items that drop you out of time, such as this Playboy reader's letter. Seeing the trace of a blue-collar guy from Philomath, Oregon, perhaps reading Playboy in his lunch break at the cannery, picking up the closest piece of paper to hand to share his thoughts on the social sexual melodrama of male-female relations to arch-feminist Germaine Greer feels like an extraordinary gift.
Two letter sleeves, 2 thin slices of boiled egg, 5 thin slices of cucumber, an incomplete slice of pressed tongue, slice of ham 6 inches by 4 inches, 6 thin slices of tomato, and Schweppes tomato juice and vodka. The Women in Literature series, like others in Greer's archive, juxtaposes material of serious research interest with other more whimsical records. A file of religious sheet music also contains a handwritten transcript of the lyrics to Lucille Bogan's 1930s dirty blues song, Shave 'Em Dry. The blank backs of meeting minutes showcase sketches and shopping lists that, like this example, are a kind of found poetry. These touches of whimsy sit within a series which documents Greer's serious and self-consciously feminist work as a researcher and publisher of early women writers. Chief among this work is her setup of university programs and centres like Tulsa that research and teach women's writing, and the conception of Stump Cross Books as a platform for the careful republication of scholarly works of neglected and pioneer women poets. Stump Cross produced editions of the works of 17th century writers Aphra Behn, Catherine Phillips and Anne Wharton. Looking through these files reveals Greer's commitment to publishing craft and tradition. One folder holds this small metal stamp used to emboss the spine of the Stump Cross hardback edition of Anne Wharton's works. Held with samples of the edition's cover boards, the stamp sits alongside files of correspondence investigating and evaluating printing and binding processes. The Wharton edition was the only Stump Cross volume produced in both hard and soft covers. Each of the soft cover books were bound, in Greer's words, like French ones in off-white paper. Other co-located files hold designs for the publisher's Phoenix emblem. This phoenix reappears in the corners of Stump Cross Books' letterhead and form correspondence slipped inside other files. It is one of Greer's many animals which has left its mark on this archive. Throughout the archive, we see an image of Greer committed to doing things right, or not at all. One of these unrealised projects is a collection of the poetry of Anne Finch, Countess of Winchelsea. The Finch volume was prepared in the late 1990s, with publication slated for the early 2000s. Pieces of correspondence held with the draft and research materials for the volume show the difficulties that Greer encountered in copy editing and typesetting it, and later attempting to convert it to an e-book. Reading through this correspondence, I had such a clear mental image of Greer lying awake at night, stressing out over this cyberbook. I was fascinated by the design challenges that the project threw up, and the reminder that 2004 was before the widespread uptake of Kindle, and before publishers agreed on clear standards for ebook publication. I also love the idea of Greer approaching Bill Gates for funding. The last item from the series that I want to share showcases another very different type of technology. This brochure advertises the fantastically 1980s MacLeod portable collator. This scholarly editing device was invented to allow the quick visual comparison of two copies of a published text. This brochure sits in the series along with 46 other boxes worth of material. Boxes that hold handwritten correspondence and notebooks, old published volumes, photocopies of manuscripts, library call slips, index cards, and even the occasional sheet of microfiche. These artefacts reveal an image of Greer poring over old manuscripts, peering into strange 1980s mirrored devices, and scrutinising elements of printing. Moreover, in her careful application of these techniques, both traditional and innovative, these artefacts show a researcher and a publisher dedicated to promoting the work of other women.
An archive is a collection of things that we want to remember, not things that we want to forget. But Germaine Greer doesn't want to be remembered, she wants to be forgotten. And in the audio series of the Germaine Greer Archive, we have proof.
What do you want to be remembered for?
I don't want to be remembered. Everyone always thinks I'm making this up, but I don't have ambitions to clutter up the future. I'm not a pharaoh. I'm not building a pyramid to myself.
That was Greer being interviewed by Liz Green for BBC Radio in 1999, long after she had begun preparations for the eventual sale of her archive. So what does Greer mean by "I don't want to be remembered"? I am not a pharaoh. I am not building a pyramid. While the collection and sale of an archive in some ways contradicts her, there is some logic to the statement, "I don't want to be remembered." Working with the Germaine Greer Archive, I have listened to roughly 150 hours of audio material. Most of that is Greer talking. The recordings are primarily lectures, interviews, radio appearances, and personal audio diaries. Listening through these recordings, I've had the opportunity to travel through the everyday with Greer, often sitting in on lectures, conversations, and long-distance car trips. My purpose in listening to the audio has been to create time-coded summaries, which will guide the researchers through the material. Here is an example. Basically, for every couple of minutes of audio, I wrote a sentence or two outlining what was happening or what was said. I've selected a short sample to illustrate how the time-coded summary corresponds to the audio. Here, Greer is discussing the fetishisation of women's breasts in Western society.
I hadn't actually realised how weird that is until I was talking to women in Sudan. And I was talking about augmentation mammoplasty and breast surgery generally. And they said to me, but why would a woman do that? Why would a woman have her breasts operated on? And I said, well, you know, to make them perkier, bigger. And the women said, but what for? And I said, well, you know, just so men would play with them. And the women went, oh!
This photograph was taken by time-lapse photographer Harry Benson in 1971. It shows Greer having just arrived in the USA for the book tour for The Female Eunuch. While on that tour, Greer conducted several lectures and public appearances. At the archives, we have recordings of two of them. One is Greer in discussion with students at Berkeley on the topic, the culture of rape. And the other is Greer's address to the National Press Club in Washington, where she was the first woman to ever take the stage. Listening to these recordings today highlights both how far we have come in some areas, but also how little in others. The content of this archive is extremely varied, and in addition to material focused on Greer, there are Greer's recordings of her interviews with others. One of the more recent recordings is Greer interviewing visual artist Rose Wiley at her studio for an article for The Guardian. During the recorded interview, Greer purchases a painting, Pretty Dancer, from the artist. We also have that in the collection. Over the years, Germaine has been fully aware that she was building an archive. It was done very much with intention. And there is evidence of this throughout the archive itself. Here are some examples from the audio series.
I think we're going to have to concentrate on the state of the archive. We've got to finish the archive. 1 hour a day on the archive. The archive will put matters right for posterity, supposing posterity should be interested.
At one point in an audio diary, Greer gives the date and states on the recording that it will make it easier for whoever gets her pause on the tape. Being the person with her pause on the tape, I appreciate that gesture. Archives are not just for historians, but they're also for artists and creators. They're not frozen in time, but they transform as we transform, as they are read in the context of their immediate surroundings, as well as their historical ones. Maybe Germaine Greer really doesn't want to be remembered. While she will not be easily forgotten, my hope for the archive is that, like her previous work, it can act as a catalyst for inspiration and growth, not just nostalgia. Thank you.
"16 months ago, I entered the slow world of the archive, not just as a researcher, but as a creator of records for researchers. There's been a few challenges along the way, and sometimes when I've been unsure how to proceed, the records have provided an answer. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This is written in Greer's hand on the first of 551 double-sided index cards that Germaine prepared for the female eunuch in 1969 and 1970. Although the phrase suggests equality, neither master nor slave, it also offers something more, a liberation from these categories and the frozen tedium of patriarchy, which is another form of slavery after all. But I really like it because it captures something about the work of archivists as well. As these four outstanding talks have demonstrated, archivists are people who are subtle, sophisticated, humble, modest intellectual labourers. And one of the best things about my job in the last year has been working alongside archivists and learning from them. Archivists seek to not dominate and not be enslaved by records, but to free them. When I pitched the idea of a Meet the Archivists event to Germaine, she suggested we hold on an International Women's Day. Thank you, Germaine. And she ended that email with the observation, it is rare to find an archivist who wishes to be met. But I'm really glad to have met Sarah, Lachlan, Millie and Kate, and I reckon you are too. I'm also glad to have met Sebastian Guccillo, who time-coded the Italian language audio interviews with Primo Levi, Pavarotti and Federico Fellini. I'd also like to acknowledge Natasha Story, who's a library cadet, but we let her into the archive, and she has catalogued the Greer Archive books. I'd especially like to acknowledge Dr. Katrina Dean, the university archivist who took this collection in and until about a month ago managed the Greer Archive project. Katrina has just left Australia for a new role at the University of Cambridge as the Curator of Science. But the archivist I want to acknowledge most of all is Germaine Greer herself. Her record keeping is diligent and self-conscious, and this archive has been constructed with a subtle mastery and mischief, and the subversive brilliance of her arrangements, inventories and file titles are yet to be fully recognised. So I'm just going to end on this image of Germaine and Katrina Dean in the small wood that Germaine planted at her house in Essex 30 years ago. Like a forest, the Greer Archive is a seed bank, a message to the future whose meaning is only just beginning to unfurl. And I'd really like to welcome Germaine to the stage to hear you talk about your archive, Germaine. So let's welcome Germaine Greer, archivist.
Well, I'm feeling a bit breathless, really. I had no idea I was so interesting. But I am still earnest in saying to you that the point of this archive is not me. This is not about me. It was never about me. That may seem perverse and odd, but some of you will know, for example, that I will not do print interviews. Why don't I do print interviews? Because the journalist who comes to interview me will have been given a job by the commissioning editor and will have been asked for a particular kind of copy. Give me knocking copy, catch her off her guard, or give me gossip copy, tell me who she's been in bed with. And you can spend hours with these people trying to get their questions into a groove which is going somewhere, and you can't do it. You can talk to them earnestly about things you think are wrong and things that could be changed. And they will say, they will describe your demeanour as frenzied or savage or something, when all you were suggesting was that maybe the editorial in that morning's newspaper was half-witted. But you will be accused of raving and snarling and foaming at the mouth. Everything will be described as a confrontation. And actually, I could see the way this would go is that you would be the celebrity.
And they would build you up as this monster, this strange human and mythical hybrid. And I did not want to go there. And ironically, I think it begins when I came back to Australia for the first time, because I was known in England. I was known from writing in university papers. I was known from Cambridge University. There was a real surrounding for me. But when I came back to Australia, I was a kind of mythical beast that was returning from abroad, and everybody had a Germaine Greer story, and I didn't recognise any of them. I realised that people were reaching back into their past and thinking of something that was maybe an anecdote that they could maybe reproduce in a new context. So they were all friends of mine. That was one thing. I was at Melbourne University, and I think we had 12,000 students then. And I would think, you could well have been, but that doesn't mean you knew me. And in fact, I had made myself conspicuous at Melbourne University, but through things that I was earnest about, like giving lectures about sexual guilt and the importance of escaping from the conditioning of your childhood and things like that. I stuck my neck out, not that anybody ever took any notes or remembered what I said. So I come back from England and I get told, oh, yes, I remember when you danced naked on the pub table in, I don't know, the Builders Arms, let's say. And I think, you did? Because ever since I've been a little girl, my one nightmare was that I'd be caught in public with no clothes on. The idea that I would actually get my kit off. I can't dance at the best of times, but naked on a pub. And the thing is, by the time I'd been here a month, I danced on every table in Melbourne. And I thought, this can't go on. This falsification of real events can't be allowed to continue. What can I do about this? But already, in a sort of unthinking way, I'd begun to keep things. They weren't necessarily things about me, because one of the most interesting things about the second wave of feminism is that it coincided with terrific creativity from young women. They were producing these little fanzines, these little magazines that were drawn, that were photocopied, that were stapled, and I thought they were amazing. And I had a big collection of them, but I had nowhere to put them, and most of them rotted away, and they weren't on acid-free paper. But there are, I think, there are a lot of them in the archive. And what I would say now is, now that we're beginning to raise the profile of the archive, that we can say to people who have some of these things, let us have them, please. Don't let them be lost. Don't throw them away. Let us have them and we'll take care of them. Because the point about the whole archive is that it's a portrait of a moment, of a time, not a portrait of me. I cannot understand why you would want. Well, I really can, I suppose. I can because, the celebrity section of the Daily Mail in England is edited by a man who married one of my best students and somebody whom I know pretty well. And that's his job. His job is to build these ridiculous cabezudos, they would be called, these giant puppets who are celebrities, who are really famous for nothing except being famous. And this is a media construction, and they would have done the same thing to me. So I had to find a way to avoid it. And I could never be completely successful. So there was an image of me as this kind of mad termagant who would attack anybody, and who would do anything for publicity. I mean, Australians actually believed that I would go to the opening of an envelope, which wasn't the case at all. And they never worked it out. They still haven't worked it out, that I'm never on the red carpet. I could have been on the red carpet, but I never was. I've never had a dress made to wear on the red carpet. I never, ever, ever had a celebrity lifestyle. My life was work and teaching and gardening and animals and all those things. It was not show business, although I did lots of show business. I mean, I did lots of comedy, started off doing comedy, but comedy for me was always a political weapon. So that, you know, I was in the Cambridge Footlights. I was one of the first intake of women members of that. That was partly because of my background in university theatre in Australia. It was just continuing a habit, but it also meant that there was a different kind of life from academe, for which I do not have enormous respect. I think when really serious issues become embroiled in academic discourse, they are usually done to death. But when you put them on the stage and when you present them, when you act them out, it's a different thing. So I did University Review, and then I did Nice Time, which was a very odd television program, which I loved because it was not satirical. It did not take the usual Cambridge position of intellectual superiority. It was about being very, very silly and having fun. And so we did things like, we went to Bury Town Hall, Bury in northern England, and we got ladies to slide down the banisters. Or I would walk up to people in the street and say, can I give you a kiss? And the old ladies would say, yes, of course, dear. And gentlemen in pinstripe suits would say, I think you're very rude. But there were hard things as well. I remember once we offered a man £5 to climb a lamppost. And the bloody man climbed it right to the top. And he wasn't sober. I stood there with the £5 thinking, don't fall, we're all dead. He didn't fall. And he was a poor old chippy who'd had to pawn his tools, which is what happens when you drink your wages. That you then pawn your tools and you can't get them back again, so you're out of work and da-da-da-da. So there was always this nexus. I was always trying to dig into reality and make things vivid that might not be in the normal run of things. So get involved in the underground press and all of that, which has resulted in the usual bugger up, you know. I mean, there's Play Power, which has a good deal of information about my reproductive system. What it's doing in the book, I have no idea. Richard sent me the book and said anything could be removed that I didn't like. And my position on that is, if you're prepared to do that, then you have no probity as a writer. Either you wrote it and you want it published, or you shouldn't have written it at all. And I won't even read your book. And this has been the position with every book. So that me saying to Christine Wallace, I won't help you. If you have no better way of earning a living than to exploit me, go right ahead, but I won't help you. And you shouldn't expect me to help you. And I didn't help her. And the reason I didn't attack her, I didn't attack the book, didn't read the book, but then found out that I was supposed to have an abortion about every 6 weeks. And had to point out that this is a physical impossibility. Sorry, Christine, they might be able to do it in Canberra, but I don't think they can even do it there. So I've lived in this atmosphere of fiction making about me personally and had to resist it. But also I'm not interested. When people want to talk to me about me, I'm bored. I don't want to explain myself. I don't want to explain, is it because of my relationship with my mother, my relationship with my father? I don't know why I am the way I am, but I don't feel any necessity to explain myself. I don't think it's interesting. And I don't want, the one thing I really don't want the archive to be is self-justification. You can make whatever judgment you want of the way I've behaved. Once I am no longer here, I am yours to reinterpret. And I can't control that, and I don't want to control it. I'm an old-fashioned libertarian, which means that I'm actually an anarchist. I do not believe in censorship of any kind. And that includes pornography and all the rest, which means that I've come up against other feminists in this regard. But we have been controlled by having our lips taped shut for generations. Why would I say tape somebody else's mouth shut? I want to hear your reality. I'll fight it if I must, but I won't ban it, and I won't silence you, and I won't want a safe place where I can say I can avoid being offended. I'm offended every day. The Sun newspaper offends me every day. The Guardian offends me even more because it is the world's most hypocritical of newspapers. It is the Sainsbury's of newspapers. It is just like all the other newspapers, but it pretends that it's something different, and that really gets up my nose. So I'm prepared. I mean, I think, let me tell you why I don't want to explain. I will never write an autobiography. My assistant keeps saying, because occasionally I give her a little tidbit to keep her going, and she will say, oh, you have to write a book, you have to write a book. And I say, no, the autobiography won't be written. I will never write it. And I was really upset for Doris Lessing, great writer, Nobel Prize winner. And her reaction when she was told was, she said, oh, God. And I know that feeling absolutely. Oh, God, you give me the one prize I didn't want. But that's life. But she capitulated to people who started to pressure her about her biography. She capitulated by writing one. Don't do it. A biography is always self-justifying. You are explaining yourself. And in a way, I suppose I do subscribe to that notion that says never apologise, never explain. Do what it is you have to do and hope that eventually someone will understand why you did it that way. But don't ask pardon and don't excuse yourself. And if you got it wrong, you got it wrong. Now, some of you may know, for example, that one day The Guardian rang me up and said, Steve Irwin's just been killed by a stingray, and are you upset? And I said, no. And they said, are you surprised? And I said, no. And they were offended. They said, why aren't you surprised and upset? And I said, because he had it coming. Oop. So I tried to explain that he treated animals without respect, that he created ridiculous fantasies about them having wicked intentions, being vicious and cruel, and that he was leading understanding of the natural world into an impasse, a ridiculous impasse. And I was kind of relieved, really, that the stingrays had been there to do the job. And the result of that was a huge drawer full of hate mail, which I think perhaps the archivists haven't found. But it was very interesting because people would come up to me in the street, and they'd come up and they'd go, I think you were quite right about Stephen. And I realised there's more than one kind of censorship, that people were afraid to say that he was an embarrassment. And then, of course, after at least 2 months, academe tiptoed into the limelight and said, well, we tend to think that maybe he had in some way... And they managed to say what I'd said 2 months before in words of 1 syllable. They managed to obfuscate in words of 25 syllables. But it came to the same thing in the end, and I think it's true to say that that way of dealing with native Australia, natural Australia, is no longer acceptable, that we no longer fantasise about the intentions of animals who we're harassing and corralling and sentencing to death in myriad dreadful ways. So the reason for the archive then is not to give a picture of me, but to try and give a picture of the moment. Because it would be encapsulated in all kinds of ways. It would have been described under various cliches, and people would have no way of knowing what it actually felt like at the time. I mean, when people when a mother writes a letter to me telling me what a slut
her daughter has become because of my writing, that itself is interesting. It's interesting that the mother would be so disloyal to her own daughter. But then my job is to write back to her and say, is it any surprise to you that your daughter behaves the way she does when you're prepared to write to a total stranger in these terms? Now, those letters will turn up in time. The important thing about them, well, they're there, I know, but the important thing about them is not that I wrote them. That's not the issue about them. What is really important about them is the two different ways of thinking about things that are coming into sharp conflict at this point. There are all kinds of letters like that. The letters from ordinary people are more important to me than the letters from celebrities, of which there are very few, in fact. But when, in the very beginning, when I began thinking about finding a home for the archive, the first queries we were given, and I think they might have come from the National Library of Australia, were what letters from celebrities are there in the collection? And so I had to go through the collection, and it's full of, God help me, ordinary people. I don't actually think that ordinary people are ordinary, as it happens. I think they're probably celebrities who are truly, truly ordinary. And so I was caught up in this thing where I had to try and maximise the number of celebrities. And that was a funny exercise too, because there are quite a few in there who wrote to me before they were celebrities. And the trick there is to find out who's who. It'll be great fun, I hope, for the people involved in actually sorting out the archive. I tried to make it as clear as I could, you know. Everything is labelled carefully and, generally speaking, dated. Now that I'm here, I think I'm going to supply a key to the people who've annotated the letters, because I know their handwriting, so I can tell you who they were. This is only by way of setting things in their context as much as you can. The important thing is to avoid mythologizing. There are all kinds of things in the archive, some of which I might have destroyed. There are some really, I think for me, very painful tapes that I recorded when I was involved in a really damaging relationship in which I'm in absolute anguish, and I would rather that people didn't hear that. But it has its relevance to who and what and where. I'm nervous about it. I don't mind what happens to nude images of me. They were published at the time, and they had a purpose. I mean, it may seem very odd to you, and it is kind of mad, that when Suck magazine was set up. Now, you may Suck magazine, you probably never heard of it. You know, all of this is happening in Europe. And one of the things that's really important to me here is that Australians have no idea what I've been doing for 78 years, because no Australian newspaper took up any of my work. The Age did occasionally towards the end, but decided I was too expensive. So you never knew that, whereas English people know how my mind works. They really do know, because they've been reading me every week for years and years and years. And the ones who disagree know they disagree. And the ones who don't are the people I talk to every week in England. But I have never spoken to these audiences here. And so because I am Australian, I'm really pleased that you have this muniment now, and you can find out what it is I've been doing all this time. But not because it's me, but because I couldn't have done any of it if I hadn't been Australian. And this may sound very odd, but it's one reason for my thinking in my own way and being content to think in my own way and to follow what I would have thought of as common sense. Unfortunately, in latter years, Australia has fallen for all kinds of ridiculous bullshit, and it's no longer hard-headed and no longer says, this is crap. We fall for all kinds of crap, especially the kind that has silk flags and incense and all that. And people ask me about, how important is the thinking of one or other Buddhist to my position, especially the ones in Gucci loafers. I really can't be doing with them. They want me to like Aung San Suu Kyi, and I don't because of what's happening to tribals and the Rohingya in Myanmar, I think. And she is a daughter of one of the founders of the military state, and she hasn't upset their apple cart one tiny little bit. And so it goes on. So, not going to write my own self-justification, not going to write confessions, not going to write kiss and tell. My big worry about writing kiss and tell is I think that most of the men involved have actually forgotten. And I'm beginning to forget. I keep meeting people and I'm thinking, did I? Could I have? This man is obviously a total prick. How could I? And then I think, well, maybe I didn't. It's not quite that bad, but it's not good. And I suppose somebody will come along. I'm told there are a number of new biographies in the pipeline, and I wish them well. They can sit and puzzle about who various people might be, who've signed various bits and pieces of paper, like we can't go on meeting like this, that I've kept because I know who they are. And whether other people get it right is not the issue, really. There will be gossip and there will be silliness and all of that. But more important is the voices of the people who have spoken to me. And I wish I could tell you that I've answered every letter I was ever sent and treated it with due respect, but it wouldn't be true. I mean, some of the letters are too difficult to answer, and I would give myself a hard time for weeks thinking, how do I deal with this? And then it would be too late to answer it, and I would let it go. And that is not as bad as it might be. I mean, it is very unusual in a collection of this kind to have the two sides of the correspondence. This is important in itself, but we haven't always got it. But what for me was important was what people were saying to me, which was more important to me than what I would be saying to them. I would answer as well as I could, but I didn't feel I had any divine authority when I answered. If you look at it, I mean, it's cost a fortune. Be quite clear about that. I had to build a building to keep the archive in. The 100 filing cabinets were ranged in an office where there was temperature control and humidity control and all of that. All of this costs money, and very often I didn't have the money. In the very early years, I didn't really keep everything. All kinds of things kind of accumulated and didn't get thrown away, and they got lugged from one lodging to another. And then it was only gradually, and after the visit to Australia in 1971, that I thought, I've really got to do this properly. This is more important than anything else I'm doing. Because if you want to understand how attitudes changed, then this is one way to find out. And it's not easy, it's difficult. But it's not even simply that either, because you also discover how some aspects of people's reactions to things don't change. How there is a kind of kernel of decency, I would say, and concern, and people struggling to express themselves. And it is, for me, I'm glib. It's easy for me. I was trained in glibness. But a lot of the letters that you'll see in the archive, people are not glib at all. They're struggling to put it into words. And to me, it touches my heart that they're entrusting me with this evidence of their feelings and their confusion and their despair very often. I suppose I think that the archive is in a way sacred, that it's a sacred trust. And so my job was to find people who would take care of it, who would treat it with the gentleness that it deserves.
I've been very touched by the speeches this evening. A bit too much about me, not enough about the cat. I mean, Christopher was an extraordinary cat. Christopher was a human. He was just disguised as a cat. And everybody but me hated him because I spoilt him so badly that he would run, if they didn't pick him up. He travelled on my shoulder nearly all the time. But if I wasn't there and he wanted to be on a shoulder, he would just run up somebody, which tended to remove large quantities of skin. So he came within an ace of being flung in the pond or strangled. But he was a great cat. I mean, there was one, when I had visitors in the house, he hated it. He hated people being around. And so he would go into the kitchen and get in a cupboard, and he would sit in the cupboard staring at the wall. And I would say, Christopher, come to bed, staring at the wall. And I'd go up to bed and he wouldn't come, and then eventually I'd think, I can't bear it. I couldn't sleep. He slept here for 15 years, so I'd go down and get him out of the cupboard, and he would purr loudly all the way up the stairs because he'd won. In the end, he became very thin and very ill, like a little Bombay beggar in his big red fox coat. He was a great cat, but none of my cats were less than great, I think I have to say, except that I then discovered dogs. And I always thought I wasn't grown up enough to have a dog. But when I started to wear glasses, I thought, I've got the glasses, so now I can have the dog. And so I got 2 standard poodles, who are the best dogs in the world. They are so funny. And they do jokes all the time. And if you applaud, they do them again. They are so good at knowing about how you are interacting with them. But I'm too old now for a dog, and I miss my last dog, Michael, every day. And Michael will be, there is not a lot of gush about animals in the archive. There's rather more. I mean, I feel really sorry in some ways, because one of the problems the archivists have is that I never took personal photographs. So there are no photographs of me and my family and holidays and da-da-da-da. I wasn't interested in that. I never, the whole thing of lining up for the photograph, I absolutely hate it. And I hate seeing children who are already used to it, age 3, and are standing there going, I just think, what have we done? We've turned all these people into ridiculous masks of themselves. So there's no, what there are photographs of are invertebrates, many. Now, what you're going to do with them, I have no idea. There are also incredible numbers of pictures of trees, flowers, bits of vegetation. I know what they all are. Now, what the archivists haven't realised is I'm here now, because we're going to go through them and label them. They haven't even figured that one out. And there are thousands of them. And what is more, they're not even very good. That we can't just have drawers full of pictures of leaves and nobody knowing what they are. We'll see how far we get with this notion. I mean, we could surreptitiously just shovel them into an incinerator somewhere. But you never know, because we might lose quite a few of those plants, where in the current state that we're in, with heat travelling down the country at an extraordinary rate, we may discover that a great many of these subtropical plants go out of existence. And so there is some sort of a record that they did exist in Cave Creek, which is where my rainforest project is. I'm supposed to talk for 40 minutes, but I think it's a bit too long. When did I start? Half an hour ago, I think. I want to just thank you, really, for responding to the presence of the archive, for being interested, and especially for the generosity of the assistance we've had, because this is not cheap, all of this. It wasn't cheap for me to create, as we wrongly say, the archive. I didn't create it, I just kept it. That was expensive, I didn't ever bother to tot it up, I have no idea. But it also costs a lot now
to sort it out and make it usable, make it searchable, and make it available to people, but you will be able to use it. You will be able to, for example, supposing you've got a story to tell about 1987. You can search the archive for the correspondence of 1987 and find out who else is thinking of the same things. Why are these questions being asked? And the other question, why are they asking me? Because I don't necessarily have any answers. It could be an extraordinary resource for people looking for the history of their own time, really, and the development of our ways of thinking about the big issues in our civilization. That's the job I wanted to do. I want to revive something which was very important for Cambridge University. Cambridge University invented something called social history, where instead of doing David Starkey stuff about royal gossip, you actually asked yourself how many people were starving, what were people eating, how did people end up in the war, what did the Civil War mean for people living in Wales, for example. And anybody who's read my book on Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife, will see that it's infused with this spirit of finding out what was actually going on for ordinary people. Now, Cambridge history no longer does that to that extent. And there's been a kind of wandering away towards what I call fake history. Things like Wolf Hall, why make it up? Just find out what happened. And people didn't talk that ridiculous language you made up there. There's plenty of evidence, and we need to know how to deal with it. So what is really important for me about the archive is that it's this big lump of hard evidence about the years when I have been on Earth. I don't know everything there is to know about them, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who would, if they cast me in the drama, would deal with me as a celebrity or a self-promoter or a self-publicist or something. They have every right to do that. I will say nothing about it. I will not justify myself. And I won't censor what they do. I mean, if you knew how many books I'm in, it's ridiculous. I can't understand it. One woman even wrote to me a few years ago and said, I have put you in my new book. I've never met you, but you're in my new... So God knows what's in her bloody new book. I never read it, but it's got my name. This is craziness. If you were to put together all the books that have me in them, you'd pretty soon realise that I can't be any of those people because they're all completely different. It's like reading reviews of your work. Those of you who write know that every time you have a book reviewed, every reviewer has a different opinion. And if you tried to follow them, you'd go mad. So the only thing you can do is keep on plugging, doing what it is that you do, and just hanging on to your own rag of self-belief. So I'm here to thank you, really, for coming this evening. I'm so touched that you're here. And I want you to feel that you can use the archive, that you can use it for whatever journey of discovery you're on, and that you don't have to have letters after your name. You don't have to be some grand academic panjandrum. You just have to be somebody who is earnest in your search for truth and who will be hard on yourself and try hard not to indulge in self-deception. You will possibly, if you use the archive at any length, you will be puzzled by my absence from it. At least that's, in a way, what I hope for. And there are other things where I'm all too present, and there is, for example, a meditation on the Ethiopian famine, which was a tremendous watershed in my life, which was actually recorded when I was lying on the mortuary slab because there was nowhere for me to sleep in the famine shelter, and the only place to sleep was the mortuary slab. Most people never made it to the mortuary slab,
because they died so fast they went straight into the ground. But I had a luxurious evening on the cold mortuary slab, trying to understand why it was that we can't deal with famine, why it always comes as a surprise and we never know what to do. It's pretty easy to know what to do. People need to eat, put some food in your aircraft carrier and sail it to the country in question. But we've never done that, we've never been serious. And those of you who are interested in things like famine relief or in reclamation of devastated landscapes in Australia and elsewhere, there is something for you all in this collection, but it doesn't necessarily come from me. It comes from all the community of us working together to deal with these questions. So once again, thank you so much for being here. I hope that the archive turns out to be an asset for Melbourne University, for people who want to study at Melbourne University, and for Australia itself. And that it shows a new way, maybe, of approaching recording one's own time and taking it on board and making it available, creating continuities where it's difficult to see them. So thank you again.
Whichever one. I think that one.
Yes, please.
So we've got some time for questions. There's about 15 minutes. So there's people with roving mics. Please wait for the microphone to come to you and keep your questions short.
Make them questions is a good one.
Yes, this woman in the front with the... Just while the microphone's coming, I would like to say that we have found the response to the Steve Irwin column. It's about 1,000 pieces of hate mail. And I have to just add that I was cataloguing that the day that Hillary Clinton was losing the American election. And, well, you know, that was how it was turning, and I was actually quite devastated by the level of misogyny in those responses. And that's all. Yep. OK, so let's hear the question.
Germaine, I wanted to ask you what you think about the LGBTI and inclusion and diversity policies that are sweeping through schools and universities at the moment, where young people who are different are finally feeling, perhaps like women did in the 60s and 70s, that they're being accepted, and whether you observe and have relationships with young people going through those sorts of social change?
Well, you probably know that this has been a problem for me in some ways, partly because of the way I wrote about the man-made woman in The Whole Woman, where I was arguing that the man-made woman is taking precedence over the woman-made person, really. And I just wasn't buying it. I don't buy the notion of gender that is being used, because the female eunuch is all about how women get taught gender. You get born with sex, which is tough to deal with. Then you learn gender, which is partly involves a denial of what your sex is. For example, you don't menstruate blood, you menstruate blue water, and it doesn't smell of anything. Well, I've got news for you guys, and so on. So that what's happening to biological women, the cis women, as we are now to be called, is not being dealt with. I mean, misogyny is rampant, and it shows in every level of social legislation, whether we go from childbirth to of care homes. Mm-hmm. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. There's no money, there's no dignity, there's no respect. And at the same time, we are being asked to be understanding about a group of people who believe that they're born in the wrong body. Now, you know, most of us
felt as we headed for menstruation and adolescence that we were in the wrong body. You know, who asked it to start leaking and smelling and all this stuff? And if, I don't know about in Australia, but in England, if you watch daytime TV, it's full of ads about how to stop women leaking. I mean, it's full of incontinence pants, discreet sanitary napkins. That means you can be a terrific sports person any day of the month. You think, what is this about? It just goes on and on. There's nothing else. Well, there's L'Oreal as well, of course. In between, giving babies baby milk and killing them, L'Oreal is telling Helen Mirren that she's worth it. I feel like giving her a diet of baby milk, Nestle baby milk for the next 10 years, but never mind. So the thing is, I'm not joining that particular, I don't even talk about it because I can't, because it just starts screaming and yelling. And I've had things thrown at me, I've been physically attacked, but the pretense is always that it's me that's offending everybody, and I'm not even discussing it. But I won't buy it. I will not buy it. If 51% of the population be told by a small minority that they are not real women because the small minority are real women, I mean, the academic position now is that women are to be called, born women, are to be called cis women. And if you read the latest sort of gender studies emanations from academe, they're utterly frustrating and maddening. And they don't, and at the same time as all this is happening, the actual delivery of social services to women just gets worse and worse and worse. So my position on this is that I'm not going there. You know, if 4-year-old children are telling their parents that they're in need of gender reassignment, something has gone completely, crazily wrong. And I do think that the medical establishment needs to think about the ethics of destroying healthy tissue and inculcating a lifetime of medical treatment in people who started off physically perfectly healthy. That would be unethical at any stage in the history of Western medicine, but somehow now it's being accepted under this banner. And, you know, what my position on this is a man who's lived to be 50, has been married and had 4 kids and driven a truck the whole time, who thinks he was a girl all the time, is simply mistaken. Okay. And that's it. I'm not going there. It's not my issue, and I can't defend it, and I don't want to. I mean, they're very good at doing it themselves.
Okay, so that's, I think we've had I would like another question. I think we've had a full answer to that question. Artie, would you like to ask a question? I should say that Artie represents the Victorian Lesbian Feminist Liberation Archives, which are also housed at the University of Melbourne Archives Repository. It's probably one of the world's largest grassroots representations of all sorts of women's liberation and radical movements. Artie.
Oh, thanks. I would like to know if there's anything that you regret putting in, or that you wish you had put in, or what's your favorite thing that you put in, or your least favorite thing that you put in.
I can't answer that question. I'm not good at regretting things, you know. If I get punished for doing something, then I'll cop it. But I probably won't repent doing it. And if I've drawn fire, I don't even regret doing it about Steve Irwin, you know. 1,000 hate letters is, I could decide to be scared, but I think that my scared bone got left out when I just can't be scared about that. I could be mown down by a drunk driver tomorrow. I could kill myself as a drunk driver tomorrow, probably. I think I've been insensitive about as often as most people are. And if you were if I were to think about it really, for example, when I used to talk about domestic violence, I had no idea that my mother was abusing my father. I didn't know. And now, when I know that she kicked him downstairs and beat him with the broomstick and shut him out of his house and starved him, but my mother was high-level Asperger's. You know, I should forgive her. In fact, I haven't forgiven her. I can't do it. And not because she beat up on me, but because she beat up on him. But, you know, she was frustrated. She was demented, probably. She was a handful, my mother. And I was only little when my father wasn't there in the war, and there was nothing to protect me from her wild paroxysms of rage, which I think were not even caused by her condition. I mean, she was a housewife. She wasn't working. My father took care of her. She had a very easy life, except that she was a woman of great energy who had nothing to do, and which drove her crazy, and she beat up on everybody else because of that. I wish I'd understood better, and I'm going to talk about the domestic violence with the Vice-Chancellor tomorrow, and I'm going to have to say, you know, in those days it seemed very much a gender issue, but I don't think it is a gender issue, because it involves elders, it involves children, and it also involves psychological cruelty. In the middle classes, you're less likely to get belted than you are to have your whole self-confidence eroded by your partner's sarcasm and his contempt for you that he doesn't scruple to hide even when you're among strangers. So my understanding about domestic violence has had to undergo some changes, but it doesn't make me regret what I wrote before. I mean, what I wrote before was what I could write before, and I couldn't write this other stuff then. And that's, we make our way. One of the things that interests me about women is that our lives, I think, would be so much easier if we were all gay. Our problem is that we are so heterosexual, and we're actually more heterosexual than men are. And that means that we're at the mercy of men, and we just don't know. We're even at the mercy of our own sons, whom we can't help adoring. And our relationship with our daughters is different. And these are the problems that we have got to deal with if we're going to ever arrive at an even playing field where we can treat each other decently. It's tough. And I don't think I have all the answers. All I've ever done is try to consider the question.
Okay, is there another question on a really serious topic? Because we're covering two. Yes, the woman in the...
No, I don't mind questions on silly topics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was good.
Yes, congratulations and thank you. And I'd like to hear you say something about religion and being human, divinity and being human, and gods and being human.
And why exactly is that?
Thank you. Because I'd like to know what Germaine Greer, where she places these facets of humanity.
Now then, you've asked the question in an interesting way. Let me say this, and this is probably going to be tomorrow's headline.
There's a few things to choose from, I think, Germaine, you could say.
Well, it goes like this. If God exists, I am against him. I do not want to go to heaven. I do not want to live with God. I have lived with people who thought they were God, and I definitely don't want to be anywhere near the real McCoy.
Yes, the person down the front with their hand raised. This is going to be the last question, I'm sorry.
He has the most beautiful name. His name is Langsam. He's Mr. Slowly.
Thank you, St. Germain. In the 47 years since you wrote The Female Eunuch, there's been a massively increased rate of women's participation in all facets of Western developed world. I heard you mentioning Theresa May in less than generous terms earlier, and my partner is absolutely certain, as is my older sister, that Hillary Clinton lost the election not because she was a bad candidate, but because she was a woman. So my question is a serious question, and it gives you the opportunity to look back over the last 47 years and tell us what you think has really changed for women and what hasn't changed for women in that period.
Look, it's a huge question, but let me simplify it in a way. What everybody has accepted is the idea of equality feminism, that women should earn the money that men earn. They're hypnotised by this question. And as far as I'm concerned, equality is a profoundly conservative aim. It will change nothing. We now live in a world where war is made against civilian populations, where it's women and children who are the principal casualties in places like Syria, whether they're being driven ahead of the storm or whether they're in collapsing buildings or bombed schools or all the rest of it. War is now completely made of the rich with their extraordinary killing machines destroying the poor who have no comeback. If women want to be in the army, women want to be in government, women want to be in the corporate world, they won't get to the top unless they're already organisation people. Mrs. Thatcher was the most warlike Prime Minister the English have ever had, and she is guilty and will remain guilty of a massive war crime, which she got away with. And war crimes are being committed every day by us. But we don't end up in court. Other people end up in court whom we can beat the crap out of. Women are drawing level with men in this profoundly destructive world that we live in. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the wrong way. We are getting nowhere. And to say we're going to have a female Prime Minister, apart from the fact that you should be aware that Theresa May got this job because whoever has it will never rule the country again. It's a traditional poison chalice. But Mrs. Thatcher had a poison chalice as well. They got her to do their dirty work, and when she'd done it, they slung her out like a piece of trash. She left Downing Street in tears. She must be the only Prime Minister who was ever reduced to that. As far as I'm concerned right now, we're getting nowhere. If we're going to change things, I think we're going to have to start creating a women's polity that is strong, that has its own ways of operating, that makes contact with civilians in places like Syria, that actually begins to show a network that challenges the right of destructive nations to bomb the crap out of people they don't agree with. Everything has to change. But we knew that at the beginning. If what happens when women join the army is that they discover that the army is no place for a sane human being, then they've learned something, and we can move on from there. But right now, things are looking distinctly grim.
Okay, so that's not that upbeat, but I think we can end. But I think perhaps it's possible to agree that Germain is not able to say anything dull. I mean, you know, you've answered everything with such a lot of energy. Thank you.
Well, good evening and happy International Women's Day. My name is Philip Kent. And I'm the University Librarian and Executive Director of Collections here at Melbourne. At the end of 2012, our Vice-Chancellor invited me to investigate the offer of the archive of Professor Greer on behalf of the university. It's been an exciting 4 years, and we are all very proud of the work of an enormous team to have made this milestone tonight. On behalf of all of us, I would like to thank Germaine and our archivists who spoke to us tonight for their insightful contributions to our proceedings and also to help us celebrate International Women's Day. And we have some flowers to give to... We also have flowers for our archivists who spoke so well tonight. You really made us proud. Thank you. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work of Dr. Rachel Buchanan, the Greer Curator, for orchestrating this major project and for contributing to much of the intellectual planning for tonight. I also acknowledge the considerable leadership of Dr. Katrina Dean, University Archivist, during the past 4 years, and also thank Sue Fairbanks, our Acting University Archivist, and to all of her staff in the archives for their contributions. Throughout the project, senior support from Teresa Chitty, our then Director of Research and Collections, was indispensable. We welcome Teresa back tonight from her new role as University Librarian at Adelaide. Thank you, Professor Julie Willis, a long-term friend and supporter of the library, for welcoming us tonight on behalf of the senior leadership of the university. And I'd also like to acknowledge, in her absence, the support of Professor Margaret Shiel, our Provost, who is unfortunately overseas but sends her apologies tonight. I will be eternally grateful to our donors who helped us acquire the Germaine Greer archive and to help us process it. Thank you to them and their proxies and friends who are here tonight. Also, in terms of advice and support, we thank Stephen Crease and his predecessor Ian Renard, Chair, and their supportive members of the Archives Advisory Board for their contributions over this period. Considerable logistics were necessary to organise the event for 500 people and a wait list of 400 tonight. Thanks to the professional team of Angela Flood and colleagues from Eternal Relations. I think they think that every time I approach them of another great idea. But thank you to Angela and her colleagues from External Relations, as well as our old friends in Learning Environments for recording the event tonight. In the foyer are multiple copies of a publication produced by the library to mark the 40th anniversary of International Women's Day 2 years ago. Written by Dr. Juliet Flesch, it salutes 40 women who made a contribution to the life of this university. You're welcome to take a free copy from the foyer. Thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to welcoming you to other events hosted by the University Library and Archives in the future. Thank you very much.